Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Addressing Endpoint Data Risks in Unprecedented Times. Today's event is brought to you by Druva and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for today's event. On this event, we've got a great presentation lined up for you today. I'll be introducing you to our expert presenter here in just a moment, but just a few things that you should know. First off, we want this to be an educational event. So we want to help get all your questions answered when it comes to endpoint data protection. And we'll be doing a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So make sure you get your questions in early. To do that, you use the questions tab, which is just to the right of the word handouts there, and I can call your attention to it. That's where you ask your questions during the presentation, and make sure you get your questions in early. Thank you again for all the great comments. Good morning to everyone who has joined us today. Thank you so much for your time. I also want to call your attention to the handouts. We've got 3 handouts that are available in the handouts tab. So make sure you go ahead and download those 3 PDFs now, because those won't be easily accessible after today's event. There's also a link, of course, there to the druva.com homepage for more information on Druva. And finally, at the end of the webinar, we'll be announcing the winner of the Amazon $300 gift card that we're giving away on the live presentation. If you're watching this event on demand, I'm sorry, the drawing has already occurred. The prize terms and conditions can be found in the handouts tab. And without further ado, I'm excited to introduce today's presenter. That is Mr. W. Curtis Preston, Chief Technical Evangelist at Druva. Curtis, are you there?
I am here.
I'll hand it over to you.
All right. Thanks a lot. All right. So it's interesting. I've never noticed these comments before. I like this platform. And I will say also hello back to Chris, also from sunny California. I am in San Diego myself, and it is a gorgeous day outside. But we're going to talk about this unprecedented time that we have here and the things that are happening right now that are happening to a greater degree than I think they have been before, and talk about some solutions there. So I think that at this point, more data is being created outside the data center than ever before. This was true a few months ago, but it's way more true now due to the coronavirus, COVID-19. There are most companies that I've interacted with, most everybody has a laptop. The days of people having just desktops have, not completely gone, but I think that this situation of coronavirus has made people rethink. If they were we only buy laptops for these kind of people, and for other people, we buy cheaper desktops, I think those companies are rethinking those strategies because they had to very hurriedly go out and buy laptops for everybody due to what happened here. And so suddenly everyone is mobile. And the other thing is that there are also multiple SaaS apps. It's very common for companies to have at least one SaaS app. The last time I looked into it, Druva as a company, we actually had somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 SaaS apps of various types deployed in the field. And the thing is that much of this data that I just talked about, the laptop data, the SaaS app data, much of this data is unprotected. So this is the perfect time, especially if you're a company who's now thinking about all of this data that's being created outside the data center. This is the perfect time to look at data protection as a service. So the question is, are you really protecting this data? There are some assumptions that we'll talk about here in a minute that you may have been making that are not necessarily true. So we're showing that these are Gartner numbers that 97% of companies have at least one SaaS app. This reminds me of the commercials back in the about Denteen of 4 out of 5 dentists surveyed were, it's like, what's wrong with that fifth dentist? I'm curious to know who those 3% that don't have at least one SaaS app. The other is that they think that 70% of companies will have some sort of business interruption due to an unrecoverable SaaS data loss, and that's kind of a big deal, I think. And then they're predicting over 2 billion devices by 2023. So Gartner's position has been that you should protect data regardless of location, and that's obviously been my position. For those of you unfamiliar with me, I've been in the data protection space for over 25 years, and even though I do work now for Druva, this has always been my opinion that if your data is worth creating, it's worth protecting. The other thing is that I think you should be concerned about is this idea of data silos. You look at all of these apps, and it's very common for companies to have multiple things on both sides of this, right? It's very common for you to have, say, Salesforce and Office 365, or Slack and G Suite, or Slack and Salesforce, or multiple things. And then, of course, also you have laptops, you have iOS devices or Android devices, you have PCs, you have Windows, you have all of these things that potentially your company, your employees are creating data on, and each of those very quickly becomes a data silo. And there are a number of challenges with that. So there's two types of endpoint data that we're going to talk about here. One is this data that end users are creating in SaaS apps, and we're also going to talk about what we traditionally mean when we say endpoints, which is laptops. But right now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the SaaS apps. So Gartner's position is that assuming that SaaS apps don't require backup is dangerous, and I definitely agree with that statement. So a quote from them: recycle bins do not meet Gartner's definition of backup. Office 365 offers limited recovery from ransomware or file corruption. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail in a minute. Recently, you may not be aware, especially if you're a U.S. customer, there's this UK cybersecurity center, actually came out and had an official statement of policy that it was their policy that Onedrive, which has become a common way for companies to protect data that happens to reside on laptops. It should not be thought of as a backup tool. It's a file synchronization tool, not a backup tool. We can talk more about that later, but especially when you think about things like ransomware. So what can go wrong with your data? There are a number of things that could potentially do damage to your data. The most common is just what we call fat fingering, right? Accidentally deleting, accidentally corrupting. You put something into a file that you didn't mean to put in the file, and you're like, and you accidentally save it before you realize that you've done that, right? Or, of course, there is, if we're talking about laptops or mobile devices, that the device can be lost, right? So all kinds of things. I know I personally have rendered a number of electronic devices useless, either through having them stolen from me. I have fallen into my own pool with an iPhone in my pocket. I have dropped multiple iPhones. I have dropped laptops, and so all kinds of things can happen to hardware that's in your possession. And then, and they're, it's still the number one cause of data loss is all of the traditional accidental things that can happen to your data. What is creeping up as definitely a number two at this point is ransomware. There is the data that we have is that there's a ransomware attack every 40 seconds somewhere in the world right now. It is a huge hit to a company or governmental entity if it happens. It's a huge hit from a cost perspective, a revenue perspective, your reputation. Think about the different government entities and companies that have had major ransomware attacks, and think about the fact that you know who some of those companies are. And some of them, for example, I can think of a few where they were attacked a second time. There is no way to recover from an aggressive ransomware attack other than to have a good, solid backup and recovery strategy. We'll just pay the ransom is not a strategy. The next thing is litigation and e-discovery. So we happen to live, or at least I happen to live, and guessing many of you as well happen to live in the United States, and it's the most litigious society in the history of man, as far as I can tell. Now, some of you live outside the states, but you still have lawsuits and government entities that could come in and require you to pull up various things. One of the things that you should think about with regards to all this data being created outside the data center is it's very difficult to do e-discovery. I'm going back to that data silo comment. So if you're using Salesforce and Office 365 and G Suite, and by the way, it's actually more common than you might think for companies to use both Office 365 and G Suite. They might use Office 365 for the productivity suite, and they might use G Suite for communications and maybe file sharing. You look at all of these different silos, think about doing litigation across all of those different silos, or doing e-discovery, across all those different silos. And also think about the possibility that you might not be able to get all of the data that's being requested if something happens, if there's some sort of attack or some sort of internal attack against the data, where data gets deleted and forcibly removed from the recycle bin. You're not able to go back and get that data. So think about that. The other is compliance, right? So GDPR, CCPA in the United States, which is the California Consumer Privacy Act. And if you're in the US, you're subject to that if you do business with customers in California. Just like with GDPR, you're subject to that if you are doing business with European citizens. So there are potential huge fines for not properly securing data that happens to have personal information. One of the things you might say is, well, we just don't store, we have a company policy that says we don't store personal information on end user devices. Okay, well, that's a good policy. How are you enforcing that policy? Because it doesn't matter what your policy says, it matters what your people actually do, right? And then finally, the idea of upgrading devices, right? The devices don't last forever, apparently, especially if you give one of them to me. And you need to refresh those devices. If the device is damaged, or you need to upgrade the OS, or you need to, upgrade the hardware and replace the OS, the typical cost of how a device is typically upgraded or replaced is about $400 per user, and there is a better way. So I'm just going to talk about, I'm going to go through these pretty quick, but these are 5 different things that you should protect against. Well, these are the same things that we just went through. So the idea is you should protect against all of the typical data loss scenarios that you typically look at when you, and when I say this, I refer to both laptops, mobile devices, if they have company data stored on them, as well as these SaaS apps. There's a great quote here from a Microsoft customer that's in Trust Radius, which is a pretty good site that has a lot of different reviews. And they mentioned that they, after 7 tech support calls to Microsoft, they just gave up trying to figure out what files have been deleted from a site, because they were using the built-in recovery features in Microsoft. Now, let me just talk to that for a second. I don't dislike Office 365. Okay, I don't want it to come across as an Office 365 basher. I think Office 365 has added more what I will call convenience recovery features than any of the other SaaS apps that I work with. The problem is they are convenience recovery features, such as if you have a laptop and you copy, before you edit a spreadsheet or a Word doc, you copy that to a previous version, and then you edit the new version. That previous version I would call a convenience restore copy, because it's stored right next to your other copy, right? It's stored in the same place. And that's the same thing with all of Office 365 recovery features, is all the data is stored in exactly the same place as your production data, which means if something happens, if there's a major attack or a major outage that happens that takes out your site, those features don't help. And it's really important for you to think about looking in your service agreement for your SaaS app, including Office 365, G Suite, Salesforce, Slack, all of those. None of them have anything in their SLA about backup and recovery, and you should really think about that. So, ransomware protection. So we have recovered a number of Druva customers from ransomware. So there's a good one where they're it was a Druva customers, a software manufacturer. They found out that their SharePoint files were infected by ransomware, and the only way to get those files back were to access the backup to recover those files. The ransomware is insidious, right? And you really have to have a solid protection, both the ability to go back in time, also the ability to make sure that the backup of that of whatever it is you're backing up is separated from the thing you're backing up. And so if we're talking about laptops, if we're talking about SaaS apps, that data should be stored in a separate system, in a separate network with a separate technology, as separate as you can to create as much of an air gap, as we call it, as possible. EDiscovery is a company called Allergen. They were very frustrated with a time-consuming EDiscovery process, mainly because the built-in systems for EDiscovery are often difficult or non-existent, right? I've used, for example, Office 365 built-in EDiscovery tool. I find it to be okay, but I find it to be a bit cumbersome and takes a long time. And again, it's only one tool. If you have multiple tools, you then have to deal with multiple EDiscovery tools. With data governance and compliance, there's a good story here from Leica Microsystems that they had to make sure that their data was protected in accordance with local legislation and compliance regulations. And one of the ways to do that is to have a consistent data protection policy across all of your different data types, including end user data that's stored either in a SaaS app or a laptop. And then finally, endpoints. And based on the title, maybe that's all you thought this webinar was going to be about. But we're focusing on all end user data. The thing here is that laptops, I think, are, and by the way, I've been at Druva now for 2.5 years, and so you could say, well, he's only saying this because he works for Druva and they do endpoint. One of the things we do is endpoint backup. No, I have always pushed for laptop backup. I've always felt if it can be done inexpensively, it should just happen, because there's way too much data that is created, and not just data that's being created on the laptop. There's a lot of customization that goes on with a laptop. And when you need to upgrade, for example, to Windows 10 or, I'm a Mac guy. Upgrading the OS on a Mac is, I think, a lot easier than doing it on Windows. But even that, not everybody is comfortable doing even that upgrade. And so the much easier way to do an upgrade is to basically wipe that laptop and then restore all of your data and all of your customization settings. That's what's really important, and that's what's really missing from, or one of the things that are missing from those that use file synchronization tools like OneDrive. They get just the files if the process works. If the process works, they get just the files. So just one comment on that. OneDrive, again, I have nothing against OneDrive. One of the problems from a global data protection standpoint is there is zero centralized management and reporting of OneDrive synchronization capabilities. So if you have a user that, for whatever reason, either accidentally or purposefully deletes or turns off the synchronization process, you will have zero idea that that has happened. And the only time you will find it out is when the user deletes some data and then wants it back, and then they find out that the data never left their laptop because the file synchronization process was turned off. There's zero centralized management and reporting of that. Let's see here. So let's talk about Druva's solution to this problem. So what Druva does is we back up endpoints, data centers, and cloud workloads directly to the Druva Cloud platform, which is built on AWS. So we are data protection as a service. So this may be something new to you. The easiest way I would describe it is, you know what Office 365 is, you know what Exchange is. We are Office 365, essentially, in this analogy. Most of our competitors, all but one or two of our competitors, they are Exchange in this analogy. All of our competitors, or again, most of our competitors, you buy a product from them, you install it on servers that you own, or you install it on VMs running in the cloud in your account. And then you manage those servers, you manage the OS, you manage the application, you manage, and more importantly, the storage and capacity and all of the IO capacity and all of that. You manage that entire process, and you're responsible for growing the system and monitoring all of that. Imagine all of that going away, and you just had backups that just ran, and all of that backend infrastructure and processes just automatically happened, right? Another analogy I like to do is, instead of owning a car, we'll come and pick you up in an Uber or a Lyft. We are a service that does data protection, and we do all of those things, endpoint, data centers, and cloud workloads, directly to the Druva Cloud platform. We always start with backup and restore. And then to that, we add other pieces of functionality depending on which platform we're talking about. For data centers, we do DR. And for the endpoints, we do a lot of compliance and EDiscovery, archival. We do analytics. One of the things that we do, we have machine learning that runs on your data and looks at your data, watches for trends. And one of the trends that we're able to spot is ransomware. So there are a number of events or anomaly, the bad things that happen that show up as anomalous behavior, and we're then able to identify that, notice that, notify you that something is happening, and allow you to remediate the problem. So we're able to basically tell you. So just to give you an example, Steve edits 5 files a day tops, and then one day it appears that Steve has edited 1,000 files. Well, Steve did not get really productive. Steve got ransomware. So we notify you, we stop Steve's backups, and then we help you identify what's going on and stop that before it goes on. We are not an intrusion detection system. I don't want to advertise this as that. You still should have one of those. We are the last line of defense. And because we're backing up all this data from both endpoints and SaaS apps and the data center, we get to see everything as a trend, and we can notice these things when they happen, and we can automatically notify you when that happens and then help you remediate them. From an end user perspective, we handle all of these workloads. I've mentioned them before: Salesforce, Slack, G Suite, Office 365, and the newest member to that is Slack. That's our newest product that we've added to the suite. And then on endpoints, we do both Mac OS and Windows, and we do iOS and Android devices as well. And there's a number of things on the right there. Obviously, we talked about backup and restore. We also do preserving users, right? So depending on the SaaS app, if you want to preserve their data, you have to continue licensing that user in that platform. We can do that for you. You preserve that user, you preserve their data, you can do EDiscovery against them. We already talked about ransomware and recovery. We also do search and audit, right? And things like legal hold. So imagine if you have a customer or an end user in your environment that has both a laptop, they're also a Salesforce user, and they're also Office 365 user. If you get sued about this person, you're able to, with a single button, put all of that end user's data on legal hold, and then do EDiscovery. Earlier, I mentioned about data silos, and I mentioned about how when you get an EDiscovery request, it can go across multiple platforms. Imagine having a single platform that you can then do EDiscovery against all of your end user data, regardless of where it was created. So one really important thing here is that we provide data isolation. So one of the things, if anybody ever listens to my podcast, by the way, if you don't listen to my podcast, it's called Restore It All. Feel free to check that out. Just Restore It All. You'll find it where you watch or listen to your podcast. I talk a lot about the 3-2-1 rule. So that's 3 copies of your data, or 3 versions of your data on 2 different media, one of which is somewhere else. When I talk about things like Office 365 and Salesforce and things like that, any of their convenience restore features, they satisfy the 3 in this rule. They don't satisfy the 2 or the 1. The data is all stored in the same place. It's literally just, there's a giant database behind Office 365, G Suite, Salesforce, right? When you delete something, or when you move it to a different folder or whatever, what happens is the database record is simply updated, right? The record for that item is simply updated. This item is now deleted, and we need to hold on to it it's still in the same place. That's not a backup. It's just, I can't stress that enough. It's the equivalent of, like, if you're a Mac person, you have Time Machine. It's the equivalent of taking your hard drive and slicing it, like using the partition tool and slicing it into 2 virtual hard drives, and then using Time Machine to back up one part of the hard drive to another part of the hard drive. That's not a backup, right? It's helpful for convenience reasons, but if that hard drive goes, you're not going to have a backup, right? So we also have data immutability, meaning that once the backups are stored, they're not able to be deleted or changed, stored in a separate system. Everything is encrypted before it leaves everything, and then stored encrypted as well. You have both indefinite and customizable retention. The IT can administer this, and you end up with a number of granular and flexible recovery options depending on which platform we're talking about. So because it's a cloud service, it automatically scales on demand. My favorite story to tell is we have a large pharmaceutical company that was backing up about 10,000 laptops, and they said, our CEO has read one too many ransomware story, and he'd like to back up all the laptops now. And we say, well, how much is that? Well, it's like 120,000. Well, all we had to do was assist them with rolling out the agent to 100,000 laptops, which they actually had a deployment tool, so that actually wasn't that hard. Our back-end system automatically scaled to meet their needs. It just literally just automatically does that. It both scales both compute and storage to automatically meet the needs of that customer. And they have to, the compute part has to scale extra large during that initial backup, and then it scales back during the day to back down to meet sort of the status quo. And it's infinite scalability. We're running on AWS, and it's automatically designed to scale up, and then it also scales down. Now, why does that matter? So we pay for resources as we use them. So our compute automatically scales up and down throughout the day in order to meet the current demands of our customers. The savings that we save, we pass on to you, right? That stuff just happens automatically. Super easy setup. No software to install to back up, say, Office 365 or G Suite. There's just a simple automatic there's an authentication that has to happen. There's no hardware for you to manage. There's no infrastructure for you to manage. And the really important thing here is no cost surprises. You get, in the case of Endpoint Data, so we also do data centers, and with data centers, we charge you by the gigabyte, and end user data, you're charged by the seat. By the seat and by the service, meaning if you can do just laptops, you can do just Office 365 or just Salesforce, but you can also package those together and pay one price for every user that's using those services. And there's never any storage, egress, or ingress costs. So I mentioned these apps here. It's important to mention, with Office 365, we protect almost everything. So Exchange Online, OneDrive, SharePoint, as well as Teams and SharePoint team sites. So, basically all of G Suite, all of Salesforce. With Slack, honestly, it's brand new. It's basically, we don't yet do direct restore back to Slack. What we're mainly doing here is providing legal hold and e-discovery against that data, right? So, and that feature those features will continue to grow as our customers ask for it. I've already talked about this. I've already talked about Windows and Mac OS PCs, iOS and Android. We also do virtual desktops, and it's important to mention that we preserve all device data, right? So the system files, preferences, things like that. We're also able to do remote wipe. So if a device is stolen, we can remote wipe that. We can geo-track it. You can also obviously easily recover the data that was lost or stolen from that device. We also manage the device in a complete life cycle. So I already talked about doing device refreshes, and obviously, if data is corrupted, if data is, there's ransomware or something, we can easily restore that data to another device. If you're using our Office 365 service, you could even restore stuff back to like OneDrive. We have a number of security standards and things that we comply with. And again, I already mentioned that we do encryption at rest and in motion. We also separate data from metadata. That's an important aspect. So data, all of your files, all of your emails are all sliced into, we do source ID duplication. So everything is sliced into little shards, and then those shards are individually encrypted. So even if someone would break through the multiple levels of encryption to actually get to S3, where we actually store the data, and there's so many protection things built into place to prevent that. But even if they did, what they would get is lots of little objects that they would be unable to put together because they don't have the metadata and they don't have the encryption keys, right? So it's just many systems and firewalls between you and your data, or between a black hat and the data. We run pretty much anywhere that AWS has a full suite of services, right? So all of these regions here, which pretty much allows us to be anywhere in the globe without actually being anywhere in the globe. We already talked about ransomware recovery. We already, everything is already built in, isolated, immutable. Ransomware, it is possible that ransomware will get onto a laptop or other device and then get backed up, right? That's just a possibility before the payload happens. But what's really important to understand is that ransomware tool would then not be able to actually infect your backups. It would just be an infected file within your backups, which you could later identify and easily remove, right? And then once you, because we are able to do surgical removal from backups, which is something, again, not every backup product can do. So e-discovery being able to do, didn't realize that. So instead of all of the things that you would normally do for e-discovery, we're able to do a single process. So instead of all of these different separate processes, what we're able to do, we can actually via APIs connect your backup data directly to an e-discovery service. What we do is we help you with the culling process so that you get rid of, you basically, because most of these e-discovery services charge per gigabyte or terabyte. So what you want to do is you want to get rid of the worthless data first. So we help you cull that data down to just the user or just the time frame or whatever it is. And then via APIs, we can directly connect you to that e-discovery platform. So this is a long list of customers. We have a number of customers, literally the largest companies in the world, using us to protect their data, and small companies as well. And many of them solving this end user data protection challenges. And we've been doing this for several years. So these are Gartner Peer Insight reviews. We actually have really great reviews in Gartner Peer Insights. talking about the simple user experience, how good our customer support is. And again, imagine a backup system where you never had to worry about any of the backend storage or the compute. You don't ever have to grow any of that stuff. It just automatically grows to meet your needs. We have over 4,000 customers. I mentioned already built natively on AWS, and we have over 150 petabytes. That's after deduplication of data under management. Here's our hero slide that we go across industries. There are a number of companies in each industry as well. All right, so with that, I think I'm going to hand things back over to David and for Q&A.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great presentation, Curtis. As always, great to have you on these events. We do have a lot of good questions coming in for you from the audience. While we do that, I'm just going to bring up this poll for the audience. I want to call your attention to that. It says, what additional information would you like about the Druva solution? And we'll just leave that up while we do some Q&A. So let's see, first question that came in, they're asking about, can Druva help with instant VM recovery? Is that, I know we were talking about endpoints today, but what about virtual machine backup?
Happy to do that. Yeah. So it depends on how you define instant VM recovery, right? So this is a feature in some backup products where you can run a VM directly from the backup without having to do anything. We do not yet have that feature. Watch this space. Having said that, what we do have is automated and near instant disaster recovery in the cloud. So what you do is you decide up front which VMs that you would like to recover in time of disaster, and we pre-populate those images basically you created a. So we do run on Amazon, but you do not need an Amazon account in order to utilize our services. What you just use our service. But this feature, if you want to do a disaster recovery, you do need an Amazon virtual private cloud, a VPC. You install our cloud connector in there, and we basically pre-populate the images for the VMs that you've decided that you want to do DR of. And we update them as often as you ask us to. The typical setting is after every backup. We then do an incremental restore to that image. And then when you need to declare a disaster of one or thousands of VMs, you push a single button and that VM is brought up. It takes roughly 15 to 25 minutes to do that. And it will be brought up to the most recent time that you synced it, which is the typical setting is after every backup, and the most frequently that we can do in Phoenix is every hour. In this product, the Endpoint product, we're actually able to back up every 5 minutes, but with Phoenix, it's every hour.
Nice. Okay, that's powerful. A single push button to restore all virtual machines in case there's a disaster. Very cool. Next question they're asking.
Sorry, David. I should have mentioned it's also a single button to fail back. That's really important to mention that because a lot of people talk about failover, but they don't talk about fail back. We also automate the fail back as well. So anyway, next question.
Yeah, that's an important feature that a lot of people leave out sometimes. Is we failed over, but how are we going to ever get that back? Because that's important as well. Very important. Next question that came in, they're asking, what do you think the top endpoint data risk is?
It depends on the day of the week. I think number one is still, people, meaning, fat fingering, doing stupid things with your files. Oops. Really right behind that. And that's just in terms of frequency of incidents. Right? There will be many more deleted files or accidentally corrupted laptops or people dropping their phones into a pool. There will be many of those than ransomware attacks, right? So from a sheer number of incidents, I think it's still, basically just people doing dumb things. But in terms of the thing that makes me lay awake at night, it's ransomware. I think that there is ransomware as a service. You do not need to be a hacker to do ransomware, you can literally go on the dark web, select your target company, and you get they attack it for you, and you get a portion of the proceeds. It's way too easy to attack companies.
Absolutely, yeah. Scary times. Ransomware as a service. Um, Next question they're asking about: can Druva offer FedRAMP compatibility?
We do have FedRAMP for most of our. I know we have it for this product, the product that we've been talking about. I'm arguing in my head. I'm not sure if every service that I described today is available via FedRAMP, but I know that that we are FedRAMP certified for Druva and Sync.
Okay. Let's see. Adam's asking if you can explain more about the surgical removal of malware or ransomware in the backup.
Yes. So basically, we have a feature that allows you to identify files of any type, either by name or by, it's sort of a general search. So you can search for, you could decide by company policy that you don't think you should be storing MP3 files on your backups, and you can identify all MP3 files and just surgically delete them out of the backups. This is possible because we don't store backups as giant images the way most backup software products do, right? Every item that we back up, whether it's a file or an email, it is sliced into pieces and stored. Those pieces are each, if you know what an object is, if you know what an object is in S3, every file, every email is actually multiple smaller objects that are stored. So it means that if we need to surgically delete an email or a file from backup, it's super easy. It's just identifying which file that needs to go, and then we just surgically remove the objects that are associated with that file, both the current version as well as any historical versions. So that if you can identify via your intrusion detection system the actual file that has infected your front end systems, we can surgically remove that file out of your backup with zero problem.
Nice. That's really cool. A question here from David. He said, I missed the podcast. Name of your podcast. Can you repeat it?
Should I do a plug for my podcast? Of course I will do that. So my podcast is called Restore It All. If you search on that, you should find that. I host it on, it's actually on SoundCloud, but it's on, if you want to follow the RSS feed, it's also on backupcentral.com, which is my website.
Nice. Okay. Restore it all. All right. Another question here. If ransomware starts encrypting an endpoint, can Druva help with detection? Any instances where coordinated attacks across multiple endpoints can be halted? Any suggestions on, what can Druva do to help once ransomware starts?
Yeah. So yes, we can help, but we are not an intrusion detection system. We're going to tell you that you're infected, right? We will notice after you run your next backup. There's nothing we're doing actively on the endpoint to look for ransomware. What we're doing is we're looking for anomalous behavior in the backup. And I gave one example. There are others. Suddenly there are 1,000 files changed on a laptop that normally changes 5 files. We will notice that. We then notify the appropriate administrator, and then we can do things like stop the backups. These are all decisions that you would make. Stop the backups. Our best advice is to wipe that device and then restore just the data that is important to put the device back into operation, rather than try to uninfect it.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. Next question. What about the future of Druva? They're asking about, Druva integrates with AWS. Do you have any future cloud integrations that you can share right now, or endpoint integrations or SaaS apps?
Yes. Of course we have. I was trying to just answer with just a yes. We have future plans with other cloud apps, with other cloud providers, with other devices. It would be NDA stuff for me to share that stuff at this time.
Okay. the cool stuff is on the horizon. That's what I'm hearing. So looking forward to that on future events here.
There's
Let's see.
always
Next
cool
question.
stuff.
That's right. That's right. Next question. They're asking about our OneDrive backup. Um, can I use OneDrive to back up
hmm
a laptop?
hmm So yes and no. Okay. Yes, you can technically use OneDrive to synchronize files from your laptop to Microsoft, but there is zero centralized management and reporting of that. So as an administrator who's responsible for protecting your company's data, you will have zero knowledge as to whether or not your laptops are syncing at all, whether or not their syncing process is working, whether or not they've synced recently, whether or not your actual end user is smart enough to actually deactivate the process because maybe they thought it was taking up too much processing power or hard drive power. You will have zero visibility into that. Number one. Number two, um, OneDrive is not a backup. OneDrive is something to be backed up, right? So, yes, you can. So yes, if you used OneDrive to sync the. So let me back up. The thing that frustrates me the most is when a customer says we don't need Office 365 backup and we don't need laptop backup, we're just going to use OneDrive. Okay, so you've synced your data maybe up into a cloud provider that isn't backing up your data. So again, you're not following the most basic rule of backup, which is a 3-2-1 rule. You're not making sure that your backups are happening, and your backups can easily be thwarted by someone who purposefully or accidentally wants to deactivate that process, and you have zero knowledge if that happens. So, which can create a number of data loss incidents, EDiscovery incidents. So long and short of it is no, OneDrive is not a backup.
Okay. Okay. And I mean, to step back for a minute, why do companies really even need to back up
hmm
laptops at all if they just tell their users, well, just put every file that's important in OneDrive?
Again, well, for the same reason, right? So users do what users want to do. I've used OneDrive as a customer, and I find the process of, so if what you're saying is you're not allowed to use your locally created Microsoft copy of Word. You have to use the online version, therefore automatically storing data there. So if you do that, if you enforce it so that they're not allowed to use the local apps, and they're not allowed to use any local apps that create data. By the way, Microsoft is not the only app that you might have, right? So that means you probably will have local apps. So what you're then talking about is storing your data into the quote unquote OneDrive folder on your laptop, and then counting on that same synchronization process to store that data up in OneDrive. Um, the there are two levels here. If what you're doing is you're saying we're gonna trust OneDrive to work, the synchronization process to work, and then you're going to protect the data in Office 365 via a service like ours, that's one thing. But the other thing is also, if you do that, you go back to the device refresh issue, the OS upgrade issue. You don't handle that issue, you end up refreshing that laptop with a process that takes way more time and costs way more money than just backing up that laptop on a regular basis and refreshing it. So yes, you can do that. So the short answer is because upgrading and replacing the laptop costs way more than just backing it up.
Yeah, yeah, great answer. I mean, when I was an IT manager, initially we said we don't back up end user, workstations and laptops. Just put everything in the file share. Of course, that was before OneDrive. But
Right.
just like with your idea there, I mean, just like with the idea of telling everybody to put everything in OneDrive, users, of course, don't always listen to IT, and so they started using their local desktop and
Right. It's
installing new
faster.
applications that had local data, and yeah, so.
hmm
All right. So
And
here's an
by the way,
interesting.
let me just to throw that on top. So the other thing is going back to the current world. Um, a lot of this stuff, it becomes increasingly important to be able to upgrade a laptop remotely in the current world, right? So the more and more people are remote, the more and more making a replacing or upgrading a laptop seamless without having to have a person with an IT person literally in front of them, because that isn't possible for many employees. Definitely not right now, but even more so, or even normally, just you have all these remote employees, and to be able to replace or upgrade their laptops without ever having to visit them, it saves a ton of money.
Absolutely. Yeah, great point. Great point. And then here's an interesting question. What does Microsoft say about the backup of Office 365 applications?
Crickets. Yeah, sadly, it's crickets. So they do have a statement on their website on their consumer grade Office 365 where they say we recommend you back up your data. They say nothing about it in either one way or the other in the commercial version. And the thing is, they're not doing anything additional data protection wise with the commercial version that they're not doing with the other one. So it just kills me. So officially they say nothing. Uh, Depending on who your TAM is, your technical account manager, they may actually tell you you don't need to back it up. All I will say is what they definitely aren't doing is they're definitely not putting anything in their SLA that says that they will restore your data if something bad happens to your account. The only thing they're doing is from a DR perspective, they do have DR copies that should protect you in case of a massive data center loss. But I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about hacker attacks and internal attacks and a rogue administrator that goes in and deletes that reduces the number of versions in OneDrive down to one instead of the default. You know, rogue admins are a thing, and I'm worried about all these bad things that could potentially happen from a logical perspective that OneDrive simply or Microsoft Office 365 and Salesforce and G Suite they just simply don't protect you against. And if any of those happen to you, um, even if, let's say, what you're talking about is you get a massive ransomware attack on your laptops and it infects your OneDrive folder, which then replicates up to your OneDrive online folder, uh, all of that. So they have convenience restore features that are there for restoring onesie twosie files. Putting your whole world back is our job. That's not the way their product works. They're convenience restore features. So if the worst happens to you, it will not be helpful. And you won't be able to complain because there's nothing in your SLA. And it's just really important to understand that.
Yeah, great point. You're not going to call up the CEO of Microsoft and ask him to put all your data back.
Yeah,
That's not really there.
there's actually there's a lawsuit. I don't know what the current status is, but there's a lawsuit in California where a company had all their entire company's intellectual property stored in their G Drive in Google, and they a accidental admin deleted their account, right? Deleted their whole account accidentally, and they couldn't get it back. Basically, Google's like, well, we don't have backups of your stuff. Like, that's supposed to be your job, right? And they're suing Google. Well, good luck, because there's nothing in their SLA that says that they are supposed to be doing that.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah, too many people put way too much faith in the public cloud and SaaS
yeah,
offering, just
yeah.
assuming they've got everything covered. But you got to read the fine print. What about when it comes to compliance? Are you
Mm-hmm.
seeing more and more that SaaS applications and endpoints are required for companies, or protection of those are required for companies to be compliant?
Well, again, I made an allusion to it earlier. So most of the compliance stuff that we've been dealing with has been personal information, right? So either what America calls PII or just personal information in the EU. Um, and most people have a company policy that says don't store personal information in plain text on a laptop, right? Obviously, it's going to be stored in Salesforce and things like that. But like I know that we as a company, when we started working towards being more compliant towards like GDPR, we make sure we don't, when we get like when this webinar is done, the data that we get from you will go immediately into Salesforce, where it's stored, encrypted, and protected, and we're not going to be passing spreadsheets around, right? So we have that as a company policy, and a lot of people have done that. But again, I go back to the statement, how do you ensure compliance, right? So one of the ways to ensure compliance, this goes on the list of why backup laptops. Back up your laptop so that you can run an EDiscovery search against it, and you can regularly look for, we can do this automatically, look for spreadsheets or Word documents that have entries in them that are 3 digits followed by a dash, followed by 2 digits, followed by a dash, followed by 4 digits, right? Why are you storing social security numbers in a spreadsheet, right? So do that. Look up in, Office 365. Make sure it's not being stored up in your Google Drive or your, all of those things. If you're protecting all that data, you can run continual and regular checks to make sure that you're not storing the type of data that you're worried about in any of these systems. So yes, we're definitely seeing an increase in interest in features like that.
Excellent. So when it comes to the endpoint protection product here, I mean, what's the best way to get started? Is there a trial? How does that work?
So yes, there is a trial, and obviously everybody that selected the appropriate thing will be contacted by someone to help them do that. It is super easy. This is the most beautiful thing about a SaaS offering, right? So you look at our competitors where they have some software that you got to install. You got to size your environment appropriately, right? So how big is your Office 365 environment? I don't know. We have 300 users. How much data is that? I don't know, right? We don't need all that information. You literally just go in, authenticate, and then boom. I mean, it's literally a single authentication, and then you either specify a few users or you specify all users, and then we just magically start backing that up. You don't have to do any sizing or anything like that from an IT perspective. It's super easy. Laptops, single agent install, and then you're off and running. And it's a very quick setup. And yes, we can do a demo of a small number of users or your entire environment. And it literally takes like 15 minutes from beginning to end to set that stuff up.
Excellent. Yeah, it sounds super easy to do. Let's see. It looks like we've covered all the questions that we had in the queue. Curtis, it's been really great having you on the event today. I learned a lot about endpoint data protection and the importance of backing up SaaS applications. Thank you so much.
Happy to be here.
And thank you to Druva for supporting today's event. Make sure that you check out the handouts that are available there for download in the handouts tab. You've got the Druva InSync data sheet. You've got the 5 reasons why OneDrive endpoints need third-party data protection. And finally, the pitfalls of enterprise, 10 common pitfalls of enterprise endpoint backup. So make sure that you check out all those resources and get those before the event is over. Before we go, I want to award the $300 Amazon gift card that is going out to our lucky prize winner, who is Ferris Amari from Louisiana. Congratulations, Ferris Amari from Louisiana. And again, thank you so much to Druva for supporting today's event. Data protection for the cloud era, visit druva.com for more information. Have a great day. See you next time. Bye-bye.